Well, thank you again. Introduce these two gentlemen that put this program together. Fred Wise had a many-year project of rebuilding a yacht, classic yacht. And Fred has been in business for quite some time. I understand his first captain's license was written in Roman numerals. And again, you better looking for it. But this is an interesting project using some interesting material. Right?
Yeah. All right. Well, obviously, this is pretty self-explanatory. This sort of started the journey. This was this is William Atkins Eric, which was designed in the 1920s, and it was probably one of the first small craft that was sort of coveted by anybody that was interested in doing any cruising. They used to sell the plans for $9.95 in the back of Rudder magazine. It was actually designed in 1924 by the designer William Atkin and William Nutting, who was the first editor of Yachting magazine and also the first Commodore of the Cruising Club of America. The interest, like I said, through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s was in this boat, and it was sort of it was again popularized in the 70s and 80s as the design of the West Sail 32. In 1924, 3 of these boats were built in Huntington, Long Island, and we happened to buy one, which was the Eric, which was the name of the design, in 1977, and did a small restoration on it when cruising in the Bahamas. The Tahiti Ketch was also about the same time frame as the Eric. It was designed by John Hanna, same type of thing. There were numerous boats built. This was one of the first boats to ever do a double circumnavigation. There were several of them that did that. Again, a lot of home-built boats. Interesting history. Very popular back in the time. Obviously, it's sort of antiquated by today's standards, but then this was one of the last of John Hanna's designs that he did right before the Second World War. It was probably the biggest one that he did. It's 42 feet, 40,000 pounds, 13.6 beam. It's a big vessel for what it is. This is the boat that was built, and it was the Albatross design, built in Polesbo, Washington. It was a 7-year project for this gentleman who was a sheet metal worker at the Bremerton shipyard. He built this boat in his backyard on weekends and after work. It took him 7 years. He had 5 children. It was kind of actually an amazing project for this guy. He was launched in Silverdale, Washington on June 1st, 1965. They actually put this thing on they jacked it up. It was a bunch of house movers, and they put it on a trailer and drove it out onto these flats, and the tide came around and picked it up and floated it off. So fast forward a number of years, we found this boat in California around 2002. Made a deal long distance without seeing the boat, flew out there. I had orchestrated a fairly complete day to do some surveying for myself, and then we had arranged to do a survey the next day. My plans did not quite, as a surveyor, my plans did not quite, go according to schedule. And the idea was to haul the boat, pull some fasteners. The boat had all the top hamper, all the decks, deck beams, house, all that had been completely replaced. But the hull was the original longleaf, Alaskan yellow cedar planking with galvanized fastenings. So that was sort of the Achilles heel of this boat at that time. At any rate, we decided to purchase it, knowing that we were going to have some issues with the hull, probably not knowing exactly how deep we were going to get into it. But so we de-rigged it, hired a truck, brought it out to the East Coast. This is it on the truck. This is in Greg Neck Boatyard in Galena, where we live. We launched it, rigged it, sailed it a little bit for about a year and a half, hauled it out of the water, and at this point, the topsides had been painted. There was some evidence of some issues with the fasteners, but after about 2 years, we decided to put it in a building and to go after the refastening process. Well, this was just some notes on the boat itself. The previous owner had, like I said, done all of the upper, the decks and replaced all that, and had actually was in the process of getting ready to do a refastening job. He had 5,000 Manel screws made for the project. I think once he got into trying to remove the fasteners, he realized that it was beyond his capabilities, and that was one of the reasons that he had sold the boat. Anyway, we put it in a building in 2000 and around 2004, and started the refastening process. I don't have a lot of photographs of all the planks off the boat, but in essence, what we ended up having to do was remove all the planks, extract 6,000 corroded in various degrees galvanized fastenings, and basically replank the boat. We did basically the worst part of the plank. We ended up using about 90% of the original planking, which if it hadn't have been this old growth Alaskan cedar, it would have probably been, we would have probably had to replank it with something new. But we ended up utilizing most of the planking. There was some bad planking from the previous deck leaks that prior to the decks being replaced. We eliminated all the butt blocks using this sort of half lap system over where the butt blocks were, gluing it, machine screwing it at the laps, and then and refastening. So each plank was removed, the holes plugged, the backside of the planks were treated with penetrating epoxy and painted, and then the process of putting them back on. 2.5 inch number 18 bronze screws. We used 5200 at the fang surfaces. Just to give us a little extra structural strength in those areas. Then all the seams were routed out and splined and glued. And right from the beginning, the whole process was conceived with sheathing the boat. We finished the planking process, and then faired the boat out, and started the sheathing process, which basically was 2 layers of 1708 material, about 90 gallons of epoxy, a laminating epoxy, and about 700 to 800 pounds of material that went onto the boat. And actually, there's a couple shots of it in the laminating process. What we did was we put a glass down to the keelson right above the ballast, and then mechanically fastened that after we had 2 layers on. But this is what we basically took the took the material, wetted it out on the table, rolled it up on this roller, and made these racks that we would take the cloth up at the shear and squeegee it onto the hull. And actually it went on pretty easily. We were actually kind of surprised. We had no issues with it, except I think the last piece that Bill and I were putting on, we had a little too much material at the top, and the weight of the material came down. So it was the last piece of material we had an issue with. And then once we got that on, there's 2 layers. We started in the middle, which was the straightest part of the boat, and as I got to the ends, the material started wrapping around. So we did some trimming there to bring the 2 pieces together, and then the next layer we overlapped that completely, and then the fairing process began. We screeded on a mixture of Cabosil and micro balloons at each one of the seams. You can sort of see it there, about maybe 8 to 10 inches wide, and then we faired that out, and then we fill it in between the 2 pieces, or between the 2 strakes of fairing compound, if you will, and then the laborious task of fairing and sanding and fairing and sanding. I figured it was about $2,000 each time I emptied the vacuum cleaner worth of material. There's the first coat of high build primer on the boat. We wrapped the keel with 2 layers. The stern tube, drilled that out, and we have a filament wound fiberglass tube in that. So the idea is to keep any water from getting into the boat as much as possible. So that's seal that, and so there. This is it. The boat's in finished primer now. We're working on finishing the rub rail, which is about 3.5 by 5.5 inches. It's a little difficult to see sort of the scale of it there, but and unfortunately, I don't have any more pictures of the boat at this stage, because you can't really get back. It's in a building where you really can't get back and take much of a panoramic shot of it. So that's kind of it. This is a rendering of the boat done by the previous owner.
How long did it take you for?
Well, it's been in the building for 14 years. Yeah. But, it's not that we worked on it every, there's some times where we didn't work on it for 6 months at a time. And then, but we've actually, in the last 2 years, we devoted just about, all of our time. I had Will, who works with me in the surveying business, and then one other guy that we worked on it. We've been actually working on it as much as we could as time would allow for that period of time. But
how much in planking did you say?
Yeah, I would say about 90%. It's beautiful old growth. If you cut a section of it and you look at it, you could. It's the trees had to be a couple hundred years old. It's beautiful stuff. And even though there was some staining from the ferrous material from the screws, it was still pretty structurally, the integrity, I think, was there. It's one of those things that's a compromise. It comes down to, how much money do you have to spend on something like this? We were kind of backed ourselves into a corner, and that, we had to, once we started, we had to do it. And we thought about possibly replanking it and putting it back as a traditional, wooden hull boat, which it sort of is. But the idea of sheathing it would, if you take the boat, down to some island and you want to haul it out for 6 months period or something like that. A wooden boat is just not practical in that respect. And plus the expense, obviously, of, painting it every year and all that. But so it's kind of a, it's been a labor of love, sort of an insane labor of love. But,
How
yeah.
did you remove the galvanized fasteners? Did you have to drill the heads off all of them?
Well, at the butts, what we did is we took a 9/16 hole saw, and we went down around each one of the screws because we cut those off anyway. And that was the worst of the corrosion. Matter of fact, I was going to bring a couple, but I didn't. There's like a lot of tetanus involved, because it's kind of nasty looking. But we used an extractor, which is a hardened split pin with a left-handed hole saw teeth cut into it. So it's about 5 or 6 teeth. The ones we were using were about 5/16 in diameter. We probably went through, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 of those. But yes, the heads, we either had to grind the heads off. Some of the ones we ended up having to use a hole saw to get off. A lot of the stuff, there was no pulling the screws out without really taking the planks off. I mean, there's no way you could have refastened this boat by just by trying to extract the screws, come back and plug the holes and redo it. We did the same. We removed all of the floor timber bolts, which were also galvanized, and the screws, like the upper screws were pretty decent. A lot of them actually backed off. There was some of the ones at the water line and below the water, which were really deteriorated. We removed all the floor timber bolts, which was about there was about maybe 100 or so on each side, by taking a piece of rod and welding it to the head of the carriage bolt. Taking a reciprocating saw and going down between the floor timber and the frame, cutting it in half, jacking the head side of the carriage bolt, driving that out. So that itself was a major operation. Keel bolts, we tried to remove the keel with no luck. I mean, we had about 100 wedges in there, and I could have run a hole saw down beside each one of the keel bolts and dropped the keel, but we got in there to the point where we could inspect it, and the bolts seemed to be fine. So we just fill it back, and so yeah, that's it's a crazy project.
So what was the single biggest challenge, would you say?
Well, I mean, just the realization that that all the planks were going to have to come off the boat, and it was going to be a very time-consuming process.
And knowing what you know now, would you do it again?
It's like falling in love. I mean, if you fall in love, hey, there's no rationality that's going to support the whole thing. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's probably not. I mean, I've already been through this on several other occasions, so I should have had it up. But
So when's she going to be launched?
It's 53 years. This June 1st is when it was originally launched, and that's what we're shooting for. So we're pretty close. Pretty close. Yeah.
What was the valve? Steel?
It was actually, this guy was it was iron. Yeah.
That's enclosed?
Yeah. It was taken down to bare metal and epoxied and then sheathed. So it'll be interesting to see. We just did a survey on Mustang, which was Rod Stevens, New York 32, built in 1936. There was about 20 of them built. It's a very active racing class in Maine, and it was owned by the same gentleman for probably 15 years, and he sailed it pretty hard. And they hauled it out at Georgetown about 20 years ago and did sort of a similar process. They didn't remove all the. It was bronze fast, and they repaired what needed to be repaired. They actually put 3 layers of 1/8-inch mahogany veneer on it, and then 1 or 2 layers of material over that. I've surveyed it a couple times. It just got surveyed and sold. Boat's been in the water for 20 years plus, and it had a few minor issues with some loose stuff in the stern. around the chain plates and up forward, where some water had gotten into it. But in general, the thing is, it sort of saved the boat at the time. And there's been a lot of controversy over this. Vices did this, they've been doing this since fiberglass came into, into popularity in the late 40s or early 50s. I mean, a lot of work boats have been glassed over, rotten work boats, to keep them for another few years. They were doing they did a lot of, Vices did a lot of sailboats back in the 70s. And they typically would lay on a very heavy laminate, almost building a hull outside of the original. I've looked at 2 or 3 of those boats that were 30 plus years. And, I mean, they all had some issues, but, it's turned out to be somewhat of a viable thing. Rods, there was a big article in Wooden Boat Magazine a couple of years ago about sort of about Mustang, but about doing this to like a boat with a lot of history, like Mustang was, and the purists don't like it. I mean, it's an economy of scale, so to speak. I mean, we're just seeing the restoration of a lot of these famous boats, Bolero, Black Watch, Finisterre, although I don't think Finisterre has actually been done yet, but Dorade, that are in the millions of dollars for the restoration. I mean, a New York 32, like Mustang, there's been several of them restored here in the last few years at over $1 million, is what the owners have spent on them. So I mean, it's a different thing. This boat, there was only a few of these boats built. I don't think the original boat, this was designed for a gentleman. I don't think he actually built a boat because of war. I think he was in the military. So there was only a few of these boats, but this is not a historic, vessel. So, I don't know. When we decided that the sheathing, it was what we were going to do, then we worked towards that goal, it would have been cheaper to plank it. It would have been cheaper to put a new planking on it. I mean, just this was like building a 42-foot boat upside down, in fiberglass. And I've built some, on a metal mold, and but they were upside down. It was a lot easier. But so it was. It certainly wasn't a. We weren't trying to, to skimp on the. But at any rate, so that's kind of where we are at this point.
Who's going to survey? Who's going to survey?
Well, I shouldn't tell you that, but who's doing this one? Or should I tell you about the one, the guy that did it in California that said, "Oh yeah, it's been completely refastened." But at any rate, no, I didn't hire him, so I can't talk bad about him. It was I surveyed it, so I'm to blame for any pain and suffering I might have brought on myself. But, anyway, so yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that's that. So we're taking names so that you get somebody's got to pay for all my embarrassment.